Hello everyone, just trying to get my desk set up and my microphone. So welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor Edit My Photo live on YouTube. Today I'm going to be editing subscriber and follower images to demonstrate how I would approach the editing process using both Lightroom and Luminar to demonstrate. So without further ado, let me see if there's anybody here in the chat. I see Vivian is here from St. Louis. Welcome, Vivian. Usually Nigel joins us at some point from the Caribbean, so I hope to see him today. I think I might even have one of your images, Vivian. No, I don't. I'd love for you to submit some new ones. I know you had submitted some a while back, so I'd love for you to submit some new ones. And I'm going to hop over here into Lightroom and show you the images that I've got to work on today. All right, can you see my screen okay? Just pop in the chat if you can see Lightroom and make sure that everything is working. There's Nigel. It's evening where he is already. Just noon here for us. Nice sunny day here in Edmonton. So hopefully my sound is good and we are ready to go. So I've picked out a few different images today for different reasons. So I want to demonstrate a few different techniques and things. I'm going to start with this one here because I've already edited it and I want to show you basically what I've done with this. Now, this is all Lightroom, and I went from this, which was the original image, to this in a few steps in Lightroom. So what I was looking at when approaching this one is that it's a nice image. There's some nice light on the I guess whatever that's called, the tractor, and the smoke coming off, the dust coming off the dirt in the field as he's going through. So it's nicely backlit, but it's a little bit flat, and you could tell that by looking at the histogram. Okay, so it's not touching the edges. There's not a lot of white. There's no white. There's no black. So I'll show you what I did to get this version. Okay. One of the first things I usually do when I start the editing process is look under the profile, the camera profile or the color profile. So if you're in Lightroom, this is under the basic panel. If you are using Luminar AI as an example, you can also find that same tool under, or that same option under the light panel. Okay, so you'd be looking under here as profiles. Okay, now I noticed that none showed up for this particular camera, and maybe it's not recognizing, or Lightroom is not recognizing the camera used. So that was an Olympus. Doesn't say which camera. DJI. Okay, so this is the drone shot. Okay, so it's obviously not recognizing the drone camera. So you may have to go and install the camera profiles for that camera. Okay, so even though there's no camera profiles installed here, if you hit this little 4 squares, so it's right underneath treatment, color, and black and white, you'll see where it says profile. Hit the little 4 squares, it's the thumbnails. And in this case, I opened up modern. I looked at artistic and I looked at modern, and the very first one, I just hover over it and it applies that, shows me what that profile is going to look like. And the very first one I did, look at the big difference, right? So just by choosing that profile, I'm halfway there already, right? So do take a look at these color profiles because they can go a long way to helping you edit your image without even touching a slider. Okay, so look at the difference, right? Oops, that's my original. Let me get back here under my history because I want to set my original here as the history shot. Okay, so here we go. So before, after. Okay, and that is just choosing that color profile. Right, then I want to do my trick where I hold the shift key double click white, double click blacks, right? If you've missed that one, I've got a video on the basic sliders in Lightroom. Rob, if you could pop that into the chat for everybody. We've got Kath and Marguerite now as well, so lots of regulars. That's great. I love to spend my Saturday afternoon with you all. I'm sure Holly will show up at some point. Okay, so just by double clicking the sliders, right? So I'm holding the shift key and double clicking on the word, and what that does is it sets it to the point where it's touching the graph, the end of the graph over here, the end of the histogram, but not going off. Okay, so that adds contrast to the image, right? The other thing that I did here was I added a little bit of clarity, and I wanted to pick up the texture in the dust and in the field, but I didn't want it everywhere, okay? So see if I do that here, it applies everywhere. Now there's two ways that I can do this. I just want to focus it sort of on this middle part, especially on the dust. So I'm going to raise it, let's go to 100 here just for demonstration, okay? Then I'm going to add a radial filter, and I'm using Shift M as a keyboard shortcut, or you can just press this little circle here. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that it's darkening. So I just double click the word effect, and I'm just going to go quite severe because I want to show where it's applying. So I'm going to make a big circle or oval, and then I'm going to rotate a little bit, but I'm obviously darkening the wrong part, so I want to do the outside, so I just need to invert. Okay, so I've done that on extreme on purpose so that I can really see where it's applying, and then I'm going to dial it back a little bit, and I'm also going to lower that texture. Okay, now remember I put 100 plus 100 texture on the overall image. When I go to minus here, okay, they add up. Okay, so for example, if I do minus 100 here, now the areas that it's applying to, which is this outer area, okay, it's actually going to be 0 in those areas. Okay, I'm going to feather it just a little bit less because I want to have like that. There we go. I want to have that nice and crispy. Okay, so these areas outside are now receiving 0 texture. So I could decide, well, I want to add a little bit of texture there. Let's go minus 50, okay? So remember, the whole image or global edit is plus 100. This one is now minus 50. So the outer area is getting plus 50 and the inner area is still getting 100, okay? So they add up together. So I like what's happening there. And I'm going to add another one in the middle because I want to even punch this up even more, right? Now obviously it's darkening again, so it remembers your last setting. So I'm just going to undo, and I'm going to add more clarity and possibly even a little bit more exposure. Okay, now remember, exposure affects the midtones, okay? And I'm just going to check my highlights aren't clipping, and they're not, so I just press the J key to get my highlight warning. Now if I bring this down a little bit, I'm going to get the dust showing up better, so that's the highlight slider, and I think I'm happy with that. Okay, so another quick before and after, and the only other thing that I did to this image was I tilted it. Okay, so notice that the final image is tilted like this, and it's also a little bit warmer, so I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. Right, take away a little bit of the pink because it looks pink to me. Now it looks more golden like the sunset. And what I did was I tilted so that it was more of a diagonal. Now I could try both directions. I found this way to be more effective. Right, and the reason I'm doing that is because this straight on, everything straight to the camera, let me just undo, okay, it's just very static. Okay, when I do the tilt, it's adding a diagonal line, right? So now your eye goes from top to bottom, left to right, and you end up sort of following the path of this tractor here, right? And let's just see, we'll darken it overall just a tiny bit. So that's what I would do to that image, right? Because the light is really fantastic and the dust coming up, it just needs to be brought out with a little bit of contrast. Okay. So a filter on top of a filter. Yes, I did 2 radial filters. You can also duplicate one. Okay, so if I like this one and what it's doing, and I want to either amplify its effect or do the same area, right? So I can just right click on the dot and do duplicate, right? And now it's magnifying that same exact effect, right? So yes, filter upon filter. Okay, let's go back to these. Now I've got another one. I tried to pick a variety of images today because there was lots of landscapes and things. So I wanted to do a few that were different. I've got a couple images from Nancy, and I wanted to try and work on this one. Now this is a JPEG as well as this one. So I wanted to give you a couple ideas that what we can do here and what the limitations of the JPEG are. Okay, so if I turn on my clipping warnings, again, that's the J key, right? You can see that the sky is blown out, okay, wherever it shows red. So if I bring the highlights down, you'll notice that it's brought some of it down, but you're not going to get any detail there. So even if I darken on a JPEG, there's no detail. Right? So if this had been a raw file, you'd probably be able to pull some detail out of there. So we're just going to ignore that for now because I want to focus on these people. So I want to see if I can bring out some of their color. I'm going to look at these presets again and the color profiles and see which one looks good. Now these are the modern. Okay, that one's not really doing that much. Oh, that looks pretty good. So that gives them a lot more sort of saturation and skin tone. So I'm going to go with that one, right? And then I'm going to, it's a little bit yellow, and I'm looking at their skin tones in particular. So I'm just going to reduce the yellow. Now when you're using these sliders, any sliders inside of Lightroom or most programs actually will have what's called a scrubby slider. So you can click on the slider and move it up and down anytime, but you'll notice that what I did was I put my mouse over top of, oops, and I need to turn my cursor on for you guys, so let me just get that. When I put my mouse over top of the word here, okay, so I'm on the temperature. When I put my mouse over the number, okay, so it says 0 right now. See, there's a little hand and a side arrow thing that shows up. So if you just click and hold there and then move back and forth, you'll see that it's moving the slider, but it's doing so at a slower rate. It's doing it slower. So you can make that adjustment without it going like really fast either direction, okay? So I think I'm just going to give them a little bit of pink. All right, so we're happy so far with a color profile and a little bit of color adjustment, maybe a little bit less yellow even, right? Now I want to bring more focus to them and less to what's going on in the background. So I'm going to use that radial filter again, and I'm going to put one on their faces, right? I'm going to darken this background, so invert. So immediately you can see what's happening here is I've got a nice effect where I'm minimizing a lot of the people and the stuff in the background, right? And I'm applying that to the outside part, right? Let's do that a little bit less and a little bit less dark, and the highlights down as well, okay? So the other thing I can do is, remember, I can copy it and then I can invert it, right? And then decide what I want to do on the inner circle. So now I just want to apply to their faces. And when I duplicate, what I do is I usually just move one a little bit so that I can see the dots. Okay, you see these little dots here? So that one activates the outer one and that one activates the inner one. Okay, so I just separate them a bit. You know, this one, I think I actually want to give them a little more black. And what else? Maybe I actually want to soften them a little bit because I want to kind of give them a softer face look. Okay, like so. And then I might go back to the outer one and take a little bit of saturation down and a little bit of contrast down. Okay, because contrast, sharpness, bright areas and bright colors are all what takes your attention. Okay, so when you have those things in the background, that's what's going to grab your attention. Okay, so let's take a look at the before and after. Okay, so obviously this looks like a picture taken on maybe a boat or a patio somewhere, and there's people in the background. So you want to try and minimize what's going on behind them, right? And focus more on the people, right? Ideally, you want to get rid of this bright sky. And we don't have that ability here because it's a JPEG. The other option is I could pull this into Luminar. Let's see what happens when we hop over there. Okay, I've got the same image in Luminar. And if we just quickly go do a sky replacement, okay, now I haven't got the same edits, but we could do a vignette real quick on them. And just adjust that. Okay, so I'm going to make a smaller vignette. Place it a little bit lower on them, like so. And then let's go do a sky replacement. Okay, so sky AI. And I want to try and look for a cloudy sky because it is cloudy. Because I don't want bright sun on them. Let's try something like that. And you'll also notice that the sky is the sky in the picture is really out of focus because the sharpness is on them. The background is out of focus, right? Now that's better. I'm not sure if that's quite the right sky. Let's keep looking. I'm trying to see one that's cloudy. Let's try this one. I don't want the blue sky so much. Let's try this one. So sometimes it takes playing around with which sky a little bit. I'm not going to be too picky once I get one that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to defocus it. Okay, I'm still not happy with that one, but I want to show you how to defocus it. Okay, you could set the orientation here. It's a little bit too sunsetty for me. Still not happy with it. See, I'm a perfectionist, so I tend to keep looking until I find the perfect one, as opposed to one that's just okay. Let's try one from my Sky Pack set. Okay, that's not bad. Let's see how one of these does. Okay, now we're getting closer. Okay, so now we've got something that's darker. If you can share the Sky Pack. Now the image is much brighter. Okay, so there's a couple things we can do. I can brighten the sky. Okay, I can add some atmospheric haze, which tends to sort of take away the contrast of the sky. So that's helping it a lot. And I also want to sort of make sure that it's blending well, and that's under mask refinement because there's a little bit of issue around their heads here. Okay, so I could close gaps and see if that does a job. Yeah, that's working a little better. Let's see about fixed details. Now we're getting closer. Okay, still not doing a great job on his head. Let me see if I can play around with that. And I'm also going to defocus the sky. Okay, so under this bottom one here is defocus, because it looks weird that the hill is out of focus, but the sky is sharp. Okay, so I'm going to give this defocus. Let's try 3. That's better. And let's see, there's no reflection. Scene relighting. Okay, this is going to actually match the scene more with the sky that's in the picture. Okay, so see how that's working nicely. Let's try that and relight the humans as well. Okay. There we go. So that is working. Now notice if I change the sky and I've used the relight features, it's going to adjust the color and the saturation with the rest of the image. Do you see that? To match. Okay. So let's see if I raise this one up a little. Okay, that's not bad. We're getting somewhere. Okay, so when you have an image like that that has a completely blown out sky, you can definitely try a sky replacement. I would probably work a little bit more to try and refine this area with his hair and see if I can get that to blend in a little bit more with a mask refinement. I can keep going with the sliders here and play around. Okay, that's better. Let's see. We're getting closer. And see how that's blending a bit more there. That's pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to hop back over to Lightroom. How are we doing? He says, I am a perfectionist. Yes. Will a blur... Okay, a couple of questions here. Okay. Oh my goodness. We got lots of questions. Okay. Philippines. Wow. Welcome. Yes. 2 a.m. So you're a night owl like me. Let me just check over here. So we've got some questions. Sault Ste. Marie. Okay, where do you find where the filter is? Is there something on top of the photo I'm not seeing? Is that your question, Rob? So what I applied was a radial filter, and that's just one of the local adjustment tools inside of Lightroom, right? So that's one of these guys up here. Okay, so it's not really a filter. It's an adjustment tool in Lightroom. Okay, questions. Yes, if you have a question. So the dots are where the filters are. They only show up when the filter interface is activated. Yes, correct. So once I activate this radial filter, then when I hover my mouse over the picture, then you see these dots of where that filter is applying. Right? If I use a graduated filter, let's say I want to darken the sky on this one, for example, right? You can see the lines and the dot, but when I close the filter, right, that's not visible. So yes, correct. Will the blur work as well on that image, or is it lightly darker because of focus on the subject? Can you explain which image you were talking about, Kath? I was working on the one of these people that I'm working on right now, or was it the other one of the tractor? Right? Will the blur work on this image? Yes, I could blur the background a little bit as well, and I could do that with the same radial filter if that's what you mean. So the one that I've applied to the background, right, you'll notice that I've applied minus exposure, minus contrast, minus highlights, minus texture, minus clarity, minus saturation, right? So I am blurring it a little bit. I could also go minus sharpness, which is like a lens blur, okay? So you can see that if I take it to an extreme, now you can see that the edges, but also the people are blurring a little bit. So if I don't want to blur them, right, I could leave it as minus blur like that and just use a brush. Okay, so now you can, basically you can use a brush on top of the radial filter, and I'm set it to erase, okay, so that I don't have any of this blur. Just making my filter bigger on the people. Okay? I want to make sure that I'm not blurring them at all, just the stuff in the background. Like so. Okay. So I've now erased, wherever you see the green is where this filter or this adjustment is applying, right? I could also paint it in, because I want to make sure that I get the stuff beside her. Okay? So when you do a radial or gradient mask, if there's bits that are missing, like in the middle here, see I'm just using a brush to paint that in, you can go and paint them in on top of applying that as a radial filter. Okay? Turn off the mask. Okay, so now you can see that I've blurred it quite a lot. Probably more than looks normal, so I'm just going to scale it back a little bit, like so. I hope that answers your question about the blur, Kath. Excellent. Okay, so let me know if that answered your question about doing the blur. So I had another image of Nancy's. I'm going to come back to this one, but I wanted to show you again what happens when you have a JPEG, because look at the histogram here. What the histogram is telling you is that there's some stuff that's overexposed, okay, so it's pushed up on the right in these parts of the sky, right? And again, if I try and bring the highlights down, and even if I darken the image, you'll see what happens is you just sort of end up with this mush in the sky, and it's not touching, it's not white anymore, now it's just gray, right? So you're never going to get the detail back when it's completely clipped like that. and clipped means off the graph, right? So on this one, I would do a sky replacement on this one as well. And I took a look at a few templates. I know there's one that I have that does a sky replacement automatically. Let me see here. Let's try this one. Okay, so Toscana is one that I've added into my own templates because I took a template that was existing in Luminar and I edited it, right? Because I changed the color a little bit. You know, obviously that's not the best sky, but we can go back in here again and look for another sky. We can find something that's fairly dramatic, you know, sunset, if we want to pick up a little bit of that, right? Now, obviously you want to make sure that your sky matches with the image, right? And we can make that work a little better because in this case, we've got, it's done a nice job masking the sky, but let's use some of this relight, okay? So relight helps the image match the sky in terms of color and tone. Right? Now there's no humans here, but look what happens when I bring that up. Okay, now the building is matching the tones of the sky better. Okay? I'll bring some of the atmospheric haze up because that kind of tones down some of the contrast in the sky so it's not quite so dark. Maybe I'll brighten it a little bit. Okay, so we're getting closer. That's not bad. Okay. The other thing I would do with this image, okay, is crop it. And I'm going to go freeform. So straighten it, first of all, with this button here. And then I'm going to go free because I want to just come in from the bottom. Because what's happening is this light area at the bottom of the water here is taking your attention. And it also makes it feel like the building's farther away because there's a lot of foreground. So I'm just going to get rid of the foreground. And I'm going to check to make sure the building's not tilting. Yeah, it is a little bit still, so I'm going to correct that a little bit more. And really quickly, we've gone from the before image, which had a lackluster sky. Once I get that cropping applied, okay, there we go. Very flat. Okay, so all I did was choose a template, adjust the sky, and do a quick crop. Okay. So that's a real quick fix on something. I find that the Luminar sky replacement works really well on images like that, where the sky is blown out. Okay, now I would probably play a bit more with that and find a more perfect sky. Okay? Now I want to look at one that's opposite. This one does have a nice sky, so I don't want to replace the sky, but I want to enhance it. Okay, because overall the image is nice. It's got some nice lighting. It's got a nice reflection, but it's a little bit flat and sort of lackluster. So I want to punch it up a little bit. And I was playing with some of my favorite templates again, and I just kind of click through them. Backlit clouds is one that I actually use a lot. It's a really popular one. It gives, look at the punch that it gives to that, right? Just try some of these others. That's not bad as well. Even a black and white might look nice on this one. Let's see what Luminar suggests. Okay, so for suggested templates, you'll see these at the top. And I think I tried this one. Okay, dark and rich. Yes, okay, I like that one a lot. Okay, so remember how I said the image was a little flat, and partly that is because it's lacking blacks, right? So now this one has made some adjustments and solved that problem, right? So now if you're not sure how to get from here to here without doing the template, okay, you can actually work backwards and sort of deconstruct it, right? So we can see what's been applied inside of Luminar with these little dots here, right? When you do the same thing in Lightroom, you'd be applying a preset, but it doesn't have anything to indicate what's been applied. You have to literally go through and look at every single one, okay? Let me just switch here. Okay, so I'm just removing myself so you can see the whole image. So it's applied something in the light tool because there was a little dot beside it. So you can see it's applied smart contrast. Looks like it shifted the color a little bit, right? And let's see if it's applied anything else down here. Okay, so it's definitely gone minus white and minus black to give it more black, and it's lowered the curve. Okay, so I did a full video on how to use curves. If you want to share that one, please, Rob, because it's something that is requested a lot, and I went into some more detail about how to use the curves. The simple version here, the simple answer is when you pull the curve down, it's going to darken, and when you push it up, it's going to lighten. Okay, so you can see that it's applying here on the shadows, and if I push that one up, it's lightening the shadows. If I push this one up, it's lightening the highlights. Okay, so I'm just going to put those back. So what it's done with this template is it's pulled both of them down and done a really nice job, but I could also tweak it a little bit. So if I decide that, okay, it's gone too far, right, I can pull it back up a little bit, right, or I can even adjust where it is on the scale here, okay? Like so. And I turned on those clipping warnings again, same thing. J key works in Luminar as it does in Lightroom. And I've got a little bit of clipping still in those clouds, so I'm going to try the highlight slider. Okay, that's working nicely. And I'm going to give this one just a tiny bit of exposure bump, because remember, exposure is mid-tones, okay? When I do that, you'll notice that then the highlights need another pull down. Okay, so I'm trying to keep detail in those clouds and brighten up the mid-tones a little bit. Okay. You see that color has been applied, denoise has been applied, and let's see what else. Looks like color harmony. Okay, so any of the ones that you want to go and have a look and see what they've done, you can open it and then just toggle it off. So that's done a really nice job of sort of warming things up, and it looks like it has adjusted some colors, right? Minus vibrance, okay? So it's just lowered the vibrance a little bit. We could go further and we could do things like lower the blues into the luminance tab, okay, which is going to darken the blues to richen it even more. We could saturate the blues a little bit more, okay, if we want. Or we could bring out some of the trees a bit because they're fairly dark. Now notice that trees, you'd think the trees have a lot of green, and there is a fair bit of green there. And that's doing a nice, something nice with the reflection as well. But trees generally also have a lot of yellow. You see that? Okay, so I'm going to bring the yellow up and just punch that a little bit. Okay. One thing it has not added is a vignette. So I add a vignette on probably 90% of my images. So I'm just going to start by taking it down real dark, lower the feather, and then I'm going to place it where I want. Now in this case, centered is fine. I could choose to off center it if I want, but in this case, centered is fine, and the shape is fine. I'm just going to make it smaller, and then back to feathered, and then lighten it a bit. So I make it dark on purpose so I can see where it is, lower the feather to see where the positioning is, the size, get it where I want it, and then put things back so that it's soft, because you don't want your vignette to look like this, right? You don't want it to have a really hard edge where it's visible. You could see the circle, right? You don't want that. You want it to be soft, high feather, and not super obvious, okay? Don't do that either, okay? So about like that. So it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but it's really bringing the focus in to the center of the image. And now that I'm looking at it again, I think I actually might move it a little bit because I want to darken these rocks a bit more. So I'm going to make it a little smaller. And then I'm just going to move this vignette up and over a little bit so it's not hitting the rocks, or the oval is not hitting the rocks, because I want to make sure the vignette is darkening them a bit more than the rest. Okay. Just like that. You know, what if I wanted to darken the rocks a little bit more? Okay, there's a few tools that you can use to do that. You can try the dodge and burn tool, and I've demonstrated this one before. You can choose lighten or darken or erase. Make sure that you dial the strength down to, I usually use around 12, right? And then just simply brush, start painting where you want to darken, okay? So this case, I'm going to darken the whole sort of bottom edge here. Remember, your eye goes to bright areas, areas of contrast, and both of those things are occurring here, right? And sharpness. So I want the eye to come into the scene a bit more. So we'll just do a little darken there. And that does a good job. Let's do a before and after. So you don't have to do a lot to this kind of image. It just needed a little bit of punch and tonal control, which is what I'm doing here, right? To bring it, to give it more pop, right? I could go up to enhance the sky even further using that sky enhance slider. But again, one thing you want to watch for, and this is something that people have requested a lot to know, is how far is too far, right? So something like that is too far. You want to make sure you're not darkening the sky overly too much and you're getting something that's called a halo. If you start to see like a little outline between the land and the sky, okay, so between the land here and the sky, it's actually not too bad, right? Not too bad a halo, but it looks like it's fake, right? Especially oversaturated up here. So make sure you dial it back so it's to a point where it's not looking overly fake, right? We could also add some structure or minus structure if I wanted to blur the clouds a little bit. Okay, I could blur the cloud, I could blur the whole image. Now it does see how it does a nice job on the clouds, but I don't want it on the rest of the image. We can mask this using a gradient mask, and I'm going to draw it up from the bottom, okay, because I want to mask the bottom part of the image. So masking means hiding, right, that tool. Nope, I got it backwards. I did it backwards again. See? I screwed up. Okay, so I want the mask to be, or in this case, I want it to show me the red on the sky. So wherever it's red is where it's going to apply this tool. Okay, so now you can see that it's softening the sky without softening the rest of the image. Okay, I could turn that off for you. See the clouds are sharp, and then the clouds are just softened a little bit. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Lightroom. I've got one that I want to show you that's something that's very different. So we've done a couple of sky replacements and enhancements. Let's do something completely different. And let me just see if there's any questions from the chat. Okay. Regarding the image of the harvester in the field, I've never used a texture slider up to 100 when editing. Is it possible to do so without introducing unwanted noise? Yes, in this case, Marguerite, I would say it's fine because the image has a lot of texture. If you were doing that on something that was pure sky, well, let's do that on this one as an example here. Let me just get back to Lightroom. Okay, if I did that on an image like this, for example, let's just take texture up to 100 and see what happens. Okay, so the ISO on this one is 100, so it shouldn't be grainy, right? But let's see when we zoom in. And I'll come into maybe a 200% for you so that we can see it a little bit closer. So there is a bit of noise. And I would say that, yes, the texture slider is enhancing that in this case. Okay, so it depends on the image is the answer that I would give here, because when we look at this one close up, right, you are getting a bit of noise in here, but because there's so much texture in the image, it's not really going to be as noticeable, okay, in the dirt, right? So when you have an image that has a lot of texture, the grain is just going to sort of blend in, if that makes sense. Okay. Oh, Nancy, hey, okay, I did a couple of your images for you today, Nancy. Beautiful mountain of a beautiful image of the mountain and the lake, and that one was, whose image was that? Rick Teal's image. He submitted that probably really early on, a few weeks ago when we started this show live, and I had lots of landscapes, so I saved his for today. So let's look at something completely different here. Okay, so I want to show you this image of these rhinos that was taken by Rajendra. And I know that they're in India because the image they had before. So let me just show you I've edited this one. Let me show you what I've done to it. Right. So it was, again, very sort of flat looking. So I did the same type of things that I did on the other ones to punch them up. I did the whites and the blacks. I applied a camera profile, and then I also applied a couple of these radial filters. Okay. So inside this radial filter on the rhinos, I applied plus texture and punched up the shadows a little bit because they were a little dark. And on the outer one, I just lowered the exposure and also saturation a little bit. Okay, because what happened is when I did the saturation, when I darkened this, okay, the outside, you'll see what happens if I go even farther. It starts to be more saturated on the outer part of the image than the inner part. So I was on the outer part, yes, here. So let me just lower the saturation. Okay, now you can see that it matches a little better. So I was just being conscious of when you make one adjustment, especially when you adjust things like if I bring the blacks down, okay, it also increases the saturation. Okay. If I turn off these radial filters, okay, that's what they're doing. So you can see that it's bringing some texture in, but I want to come in closer here because what I want you to see is that these rhinos, let me go to 100%, it's quite grainy, right, because it was shot at 1250 ISO, okay, and it was shot with a 300mm lens. Let me just check the camera here. Nikon 800, so I believe that's full frame. I'm not real versed in Nikon, but I think that's full frame. But the issue here is the shutter speed, okay? So it was shot at f8 at 1/250th of a second, but you want your shutter speed to be the reciprocal of 1 over reciprocal, your focal length. So in this case, 300. In order to get rid of camera shake. So when you're hand holding your camera, you want to make sure that you have at least 1 over the focal length of the lens. And in this case, they did not, okay? So 2/50th of a second, 300mm lens, you want it to be at least 500 on this, okay? When you're using a long lens, any camera shake from your hand movement, just holding the camera, is amplified with a long lens. So you can see that here because they're not sharp. Okay, let me back out just a little bit. Okay, so you can see that these rhinos are not sharp. Now, I'm going to show you a version that I did to fix it. And look at the difference. Let me show you these side by side here because this is going to blow your mind. Let me see if I can switch that around. There we go. Okay, so the one on the left is the original image, and you can see how blurry it is. Look what I've managed to do here. Okay, would you like to know? Who would like to know? Oh, Rajendra's here. Awesome. Okay. Would you like to know how I focused your image more, Rajendra? Because this is an amazing job with a different tool that I haven't demonstrated yet. So I want to show you what I used here. Anybody have any guesses as to what I've done to sharpen the image between the before and the after? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about it and to answer, and then I'm going to show you what I did. Okay. So there are sharpening tools in Lightroom, and that's in the detail panel. But what I find with the sharpening is that when you take it up real high, okay, even if I do masking, so it's only applying to the edges of the rhinos, I find that it doesn't do a great job, and it actually introduces or sharpens the noise. So similar to what you were asking about adding the texture filter, okay? So when you sharpen, you're actually sharpening the noise. So then I could go in here and remove the noise, but guess what noise reduction does? Okay, it actually blurs the image again, so it's back to the same problem. Okay, so this is really not working. I'm gonna go back here because I want zero sharpening. Okay, any guesses? Shooting from an elephant back. Okay, awesome. So definitely in that case, then you want to use a much faster shutter speed. And what you could have done here is open up your aperture. Okay, so you've got another stop here to 5.6 on this lens. Definitely open up your aperture to 5.6 and you could have got double your shutter speed, right? So 500. That's going to help, right? So when you're in a moving vehicle or elephant, in this case, your vehicle, you want to make sure that you use a fairly fast shutter speed. And you've done right with the ISO being high. You just need to swap out aperture for shutter speed here. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what I did to sharpen this image up. Okay, so I used a tool that is a plugin or standalone, and that one is called Sharpen AI by Topaz. So to get to it, I right click and then I go edit in and I choose Topaz Sharpen AI. Okay, now for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to use a JPEG and I'm going to use sRGB. Normally I would use TIFF and ProPhoto, which is higher quality image going in. But Topaz Sharpen is a very memory intensive program and it takes a while to apply these things, right? If that was your guess, then absolutely you're right. So do you have Topaz Sharpen, Wilma? Because it is an amazing tool. So no, I'm not going to update my Topaz right now. Never update your software when you're doing a demonstration. Right, so let me just move that so you can see his head a little bit better. So you can already see that just by generating the preview, it takes a long time. But look at the difference. And all that's happening here is it's on auto. Okay, so it's chosen stabilize. Okay, so it's 3 different modes. It's a pretty simple program to operate. You can literally just go auto, and it will pick the settings for you. Okay, it chooses between sharpen, stabilize, and focus. Okay, so if you miss the focus, I would choose that one. If you want to just sharpen overall, I would choose sharpen. Okay, but you see that it hasn't done as good a job as stabilize. So the program analyzes the image and does what it thinks is going to do the best job. And in this case, it went to stabilize and it was correct. Okay, so I'm going to stick with stabilize. And then I'm going to increase the sharpness. Let's go almost to the max here. And the noise suppression slider also, because the program knows that when you increase the sharpness, you are also increasing the noise, right? So if I bring this all the way down, you'll see that it's going to leave the noise, okay? So it's going to be noisier. Again, we have to wait for it to draw every single time, okay? But I'm going to put that noise suppression fairly high. Again, trying to find a balance between suppressing the noise so far that it actually de-sharpens again, okay? So this is how long this program takes, but look at the job it's doing between, let's look at the face here, between the before and after. Of course, it has to redraw again. Now, once I hit apply on this, it's going to apply this to plug in and make the new image, right, and bring it back into Lightroom, which is what I did before to show you the before and after. But look at the job that it's doing here, okay? So the original is on the left, and amazing, amazing job, amazing, right? So I'm going to hit apply, and you can also do things like masking this filter as well so that it only applies to certain parts of your image. Now, I have a fairly new Mac. I just got it last August, and it's going to take a while to apply. So if you get this tool, please note that it is very memory intensive. And I'm also trying to run a video here. So let me just get over here. Just come and talk to you guys while it's doing that. Okay, so I'm trying to broadcast a video while I'm doing a heavily processed image. So my video may even skip a little bit. So I think I'm actually going to cancel out of this export because it's really eating up my memory. But do note that you need a lot of memory and you need a fast high-end processor to use Topaz. Or a lot of patience, okay? You can also export the image from your software of choice and then put it into Topaz independently, okay? So I've canceled out of that because it's just really memory intensive, but you'll notice that the image that I created before, the TIFF, that's what I did before, okay? So it did take probably 2 or 3 minutes to process originally when I ran it through that plugin as a TIFF, and that's with my high-end laptop with 64 gigs of RAM, okay? So it's a fairly memory-intensive program, but I highly recommend it if you find that your images, or you have images like this, it can actually do a save, okay? Let me take a look at the questions. Right, and there's a video to a review that I did, and I did a comparison of sharpening in Lightroom and Luminar and Topaz, and for the most part Topaz won, but I actually found that Luminar does a really good job as well. And I'm just going to show you this real quick, just using the detail slider. And this is just kind of a little trick that I found, that if I zoom in here and apply the small detail slider, okay, quite liberally, you can see that it does a good job of bringing out that detail, but again, also it's bringing out that noise, right? So remember, there's always a balance between sharpening and noise, because they sort of go hand in hand. So in this image, it's definitely not doing as good a job as sharpen, right? But I've also punched up the contrast in that other one, so let's see. Okay. When you add the contrast that I'm doing here, you'll notice that it increases the detail as well. Because what's lacking when your image is actually out of focus is blacks. Because when it's blurring like that, it's actually blurring the blacks. Okay, how are we doing? I'm glad you enjoyed that, Rajinder. I'm glad you were here to see that. I've had your rhino image for a while now, and I wanted to provide a great difference and variation of images today, because we had a lot of landscapes recently. So that was a perfect image. Thank you for providing that one. All right, let's move on to another one that's different. Oops, my mouse got ahead of me here. So this one was submitted by Trish Anderson, and I'm going to show you, I've already done a little bit of editing on this one. So I'm going to show you the before and after. So a lot of what I do with my photo editing, again, is what am I looking at, and how am I approaching this image is, what is the subject, number one, okay? So when you look at the image, what do I want the viewer to look at, okay? In this case, it's her. So in the original image, when I look at this one, you'll notice that the tortillas or this flatbread that she's making are really bright, right? And your eye goes there. So let's look at the image upside down. That's my little trick for looking at images. Okay, so if you're not sure what to edit, look at your image upside down. Okay, look at the before image. Now, where does your eye go here? For me, it goes to the tortillas because they're large, they cover a lot of the image, and they're bright. Okay, so all of those things that I keep mentioning, those 4 things, if you could share the article on improving your background, please, Rob. Because I talk about looking at your image upside down to look at the background, but also this helpful when you're doing editing. Because for me, my eye goes to this little garbage can, the floor behind her, the top of her head, okay? So your eye goes to the brightest parts, the parts which are sharp, the parts which have the most contrast, and bright colors, okay? So all of the things I just mentioned. Bright colors and bright is the top of her head, contrast is the garbage can, okay? So what I'm doing with the edits on this image is I've darkened it, I've brought the highlights down, and I've used those radial filters again. Okay, so you see the radial filter. I've used a radial filter to darken the parts around her. So minus exposure and minus highlights. And I might just erase it a little bit from her face, okay, because I've got a little bit over on her. So make sure I'm keeping it off of her. Okay, so you can see that it's applying, but it's not hitting these ones here, so I might actually paint it in. Okay, so remember that when you're doing these radial filters, if you've got a part that's sort of outside of the oval, you can also use a brush to paint it back in. Okay, so I've used that, and I thought I had a second one on here. I think I used a paintbrush. Okay. No, I did not. Okay, so basically what I've done is darken those tortillas and everything around her to bring more focus on her, okay? I could also go into the HSL panel, which again controls hue, saturation, and luminance or lightness, and see if I can control this floor. Okay, so I'm going to use the targeted tool, click on the floor, and drag down. And you see it's pulling the blue and the aqua sliders. Can you see that? So again, make sure you're not going too far. Too far looks like an outline between the floor and her, but it's actually doing a pretty good job. I could do the same if I want to darken her scarf, but the danger of that is, guess what? Orange is also in skin tone. Okay, so you have to be really careful of doing orange when you have a person, because it's also going to apply to the skin tone. Okay, now you'll notice that the top of the head was taken care of with this little targeted tool here, okay, the radial filter. So can you see the difference there? And that's all just tone control. I did crop the image a little bit as well, because the original, if you want to have a look at the original, had a little orange bit over here, and then there was just sort of some busyness at the top. So I just cropped in a little bit to get rid of the orange thing and minimize some of that stuff at the top. I also may go in and just clone this, whatever this thing is out here, right? Because it's just sort of distracting. It's like a piece of garbage or something on the floor. So I'm just using the healing brush, clone that out. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, so tone control is probably one of my primary concerns when I'm doing editing, is I want to use tone control to bring out the subject more. Okay, so we did that here, right? We did that here because I darkened the edges of the image and brightened them up. I did that here by darkening the edges again. So you always want to use tone control. We did that on the rhinos to emphasize the subject. And we did that on the landscape. Okay, so let's take a look at another image. This one is by Anne Ambro. Are you with us today, Anne? She's usually here, but I'm wondering if it's nice in Vancouver and it's not raining. She's gone out to enjoy the sun. If she has, good for her. Okay, so this is the original. It is a Canon file, I believe. It's a CR2. So Canon 80D, yes, okay. And I can tell all of this because she's given me the original raw file, okay? So if you are sending images for editing, there's a link in the description below the video to submit your images. So if you are submitting images, please, if you have raw files, submit the original camera raw file, okay? If you are not shooting RAW, you might want to consider shooting both RAW and JPEG in the interim, because when you're processing in Lightroom or Luminar, it's exactly the same steps and method working with a JPEG as it is with a RAW file. Okay, so you've seen that I've edited several different images today. Some were JPEG, some are RAW, but they are treated exactly the same, but the RAW files give you much more information to work with. Can you share an article, please, Rob, on why you want to shoot RAW format, and see if that will help people as well. So the first thing I want to look at here, so remember tone control, okay? So what is it that I want the viewers to look at, okay? This has got beautiful light, and I'm going to guess that she shot this. I know this was in Cuba because she was on tour with me last January 2020 in Cuba, and I'm guessing this is either... I think this is probably Santiago de Cuba, okay? Because I know we were in Trinidad and the light is like this, but the streets are cobblestone there. So I'm guessing Santiago or Baracoa. So, Anne, if you're watching live, tell me where you shot this one. If you're watching later, put it in the comments and tell me. So the light is already beautiful. I just want to enhance what is there, okay? So I'm checking for clipping. There's a little bit of highlights clipping. So I'm going to do my usual blacks and whites, right? So I didn't click this time. I'm just using Alt Option. I want to have nice strong blacks. And there is a bit of white clipping, so I'm not going to increase it. I'm just going to bring that down a little bit, right? So in an image like this, a lot of people have a tendency to want to eliminate the shadows and do things like this. Okay, so now we've brought the highlights down, we've brought the shadows up. But what happens when you do that is you end up sort of with this mush, okay? And then they'll do something like that, okay? So this is what I call overdone HDR, also known as, and you can quote me, neon puke, okay? So that's my own term. I don't like that type of look because to me it's very overdone and it's very unnatural looking, right? So to keep it more natural looking, right, I definitely want the highlights down, but just enough to keep detail. And I want to lower the shadows or darken the blacks, not remove them, right? Because what's creating the drama in this image is actually the amount of black. I'm going to increase the warmth a little bit, so add more yellow. And let's see if there's a better color profile. So I've got landscape now, and that may be what she shot it in. And that's actually a pretty good one. Right? Standard actually gives us a bit more contrast, but landscape has done a pretty good job. Right? So we're going to go with camera landscape and just give it a little bit more gold or yellow, maybe even a little bit less pink. So less magenta, and we've just done very little to this image, okay? There's actually not a lot that I would do here. Perhaps a vignette to bringing the edges in even darker, and maybe a tiny bit of exposure just to bring that little bit of detail out of the houses, but still keeping the highlight detail. Okay. That's about all I would do with this image because it's really good. It's nicely framed with the dark foreground, the dark houses, and your eye goes directly to this little horse and buggy here, right? And kind of sort of leads you up the road, and you see these guys with the motorcycles. So there's lots of play between the horse and buggy and the guys in the motorcycles. So not a lot to do here, and this is what is a great image to begin with because it's got great light, it's got nice composition, and all you're doing with the editing is enhancing what's there to just bring it out a tiny bit more, right? Now, if I wanted to take this one into Luminar, because this is a fun image as well, I could do something with what's called a color lookup table or a LUT. You know, I'm actually just going to take it from here as a plugin into Luminar. So right click and choose Luminar AI. Okay. I'm going to make sure I edit a copy. And again, just for speed of editing, I'm going to make it a JPEG, right? But I would recommend using a TIFF for this one. And as Rob has indicated in the chat, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. I would love to see more people in the live, so bring some friends with you next time. Okay, let me get over to here. I've got two versions of Luminar open here. Let's see. I'm going to close this one. Okay. Well, my Luminar is opening. I'm going to check questions. Rob has shared the link in the chat for the form. And I'm still waiting for Luminar to open. So I hope that you are enjoying these weekly photo editing tutorials and are picking up some tips each week. There's videos from previous weeks if you want to go back and watch those. And we've also been pulling out some clips of sort of the best of, so you can watch those as well. Rob has pulled out a couple. Maybe you can share some of those videos for them as well, Rob. Okay, so we're back in. Luminar is now opened, and I am back over here. So I'm going to look specifically for one tool because I know what I want here, and that is the mood tool. Right? I could try dramatic as well, which might be interesting. So dramatic increases the contrast and makes it more sort of grungy looking if I want that. Sun rays might be cool here because the sun is coming from, you can see where the sun is coming from, basically right out of the frame at the top. So I'm actually going to see if we can add some sun rays. Now this is interesting. Look what it's done. So the sun placement is inside the building. Can you see that? It looks like it's radiating out through the building, right? So I'm going to move the sun up to where it should be, just out of the frame. So make sure that if you're adding something like this, that it's matching the direction and fitting with the shadows. So the shadows are going ever so slightly this way, right? So I'm just going to move it over here like so. Then I can do things like adjust the warmth, and this is very warm, so I'm going to make it warmer on the rays to match. Probably a few less rays. Let's do that. And then I love to do what's called randomize, and it just sort of rotates the rays. And I want one that's sort of coming down the middle of the road. I want it to hit that cyclist. And just keep going till I get something that's not bad. Okay, we're getting there. I might have to move it further off of the image as well. Oh, I had something and then I lost it. Let's just click around. So literally, I'm just playing. So part of the photo editing process is experimentation, right? I experiment all the time. All right. We can shorten the rays a little bit. Kind of like them coming out long. And we can also change the look. So the look slider on here to the right makes it sort of lighter and airier. To the left is darker and moodier, and that really works with this image because it is sort of that really silhouette. I'm going to do place image again, and I'm just going to see if I can move it up even higher. I want it up here. There we go. That's better. Okay, so I want these sun rays to be sort of coming down the middle. Work with me. There we go. Let's try that. Beautiful. Okay, now I'm going to go back to what I came for, which is the mood. Okay, so mood filter or tool in Luminar, it applies what's called a LUT or a lookup table. And by opening it and just pulling down this menu, you'll see a list of them. And by scrolling through, you'll see the sort of color grading that it applies. Now I want to get one that really enhances that feeling, or I could go with something that makes it like an old style, because that buggy, that horse and buggy, right? We could get away with something that's sort of faded and old, but I love that golden glow of the sun. So I want to just stick with it and do something that is fitting. Okay, so that one is kind of nice. Let's increase it a little bit. Let's see what we got. Okay, so before and after, okay, it's applying sort of a matte finish. Actually, let's do this one. Look at the drama. The sun rays is added. Really goes with that image. And I might just kind of bring this up a little bit. Gone a little bit too dark on me. Once we've applied the LUT, I'm going to bring that back just a little bit. So it's a dance, right? Apply one thing, check your settings, and then go back and apply or tweak the other settings that you applied first. So I like that. I'm going to apply that. What do you think about the Smart Sharpen tool in Photoshop? So if you go watch that video that I did, Regender, on the comparison, I did do the Smart Sharpen, I think in that video, but I remember when I did the comparison because I was reviewing the Topaz software. I tried the same images in Lightroom, Luminar, Photoshop, and Topaz, and most of the time Sharpen blew them away, and I find that the Smart Sharpen wasn't even close to the same as Topaz. It does a way better job. But I would suggest take that image of the rhino and run it through Smart Sharpen and see if you can get as good a result as what you saw here on the live video. And then I think Topaz has a trial version. Download a trial version and run it through there and see how it does. And if you like it and it does a good job, go ahead and get it, right? Because it does apply on images like that where, you know, maybe you've missed the focus a little bit, but you've captured like the peak of action or something that you're never going to be able to photograph again, like a safari, and you want to save that image, go ahead and get sharpened, because it will save some images that are otherwise unsalvageable. Okay. Here we are back in Lightroom. And again, this one is not super, you know, obvious. I haven't done a lot to it, but it's a great image to start. And all I've done is really enhanced it. And that sun rays just brings that sort of really nice gentle glow coming from the top, right? Can't you feel how warm that image is? I want to go sit in the sun now. Okay. I have one more image, I think, a couple more images for today, and we will be at our end. I'm going to keep these sessions to an hour and a half, just because we're all busy and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So this one was submitted by Mike Oshima, and he is one of my students in a portrait class, and he's an active member on our Digital Photo Mentor Facebook group. If you could share a link to the Facebook group, please, Rob, that would be awesome. So this image here, I really love what's happening with the layered fog and the trees here. So I want to work on this one in Luminar. I could easily do this one in Lightroom and get something really fun really quickly just by doing the whites and the blacks again. On almost every image, I do this little trick where I adjust the whites and the blacks first. And you could see what it's doing, just punching up that contrast. Again, I wouldn't want detail in this bush here. I would actually just let it go dark, okay? But just by adjusting the whites and the blacks, and let's see if we can get another, there we go, landscape profile on the camera. Okay, so whites and blacks brings the highlights down and a camera profile, and we've got something immediately that is more interesting, right? So this one I could choose to go warm with, right? If we go extreme, right, now it looks like almost like a forest fire, right? Or we could go really cool with it and emphasize the difference between the cool valley and this warm tone at the top. And I think that's the way that I'm going to go, right? But I'm going to hop over to Luminar. Oh, I closed it, so I got to open it again. I'm going to hop over into Luminar and edit this one directly in Luminar. So you notice that I'm hopping back and forth between using it as a plugin for Lightroom, and mostly that's just for demonstration purposes. I usually use it as a plugin, right? So I take my image from here into Luminar and then back to Lightroom, okay? But if you don't have Lightroom, that's why I'm demonstrating the standalone version, right? If you don't have Lightroom, you can use it all by itself. Right. Right. Any other questions while I'm waiting for Luminar to open here? Because I've got so many things open on my computer. Again, please keep in mind that when I'm demonstrating this, I'm running a streaming live, so my computer is going to be more sluggish than yours when you're doing the same type of thing. Okay, so now we've got the image, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to templates. And it's going to think about, again, suggest some things for us, right? So it starts off with easy landscapes. So the program knows that I have a landscape. And just a quick click on a couple of these to see what they're doing. And I'm looking for, remember, I want one that's got a lot of blue. So far, the long exposure one looks pretty good, right? That one. Let's see if we have one that's better in the next suggested set. And I'm just clicking through these and wait for it to catch up. Right? Not a lot of difference. Woo! Okay, we're not going to do that one. So more volume has a sky replacement built in. Not what we're looking for in this case. Right? And so far, oh, that's nice. Okay, so that, remember that one, after hours, right? And look what this one has done. There's a couple of neat things happening between these two, okay? So look at what this one has done. So crack of dawn, it looks like it's adding a lot of sharpening, right? Versus after hours, which is keeping it soft and increasing that color saturation, right? We could also go with a black and white, not so much. So I really like this after hours and what it's doing because of what I envisioned in my head. So I wanted to bring out the blue and this orange, and I want to crop it because this little stick on the side really bugs me. Okay, so there's two ways we could solve that. We could crop it, and be careful when you're cropping that I want to make sure I keep this whole tree here, but get rid of this guy, or we could use the erase tool. So I'm going to go into the Composition AI, and this is where the program suggests a composition for you. Usually what I find is the size that it picks is correct, but it doesn't always get the positioning right. So I'm just going to reposition. So remember I said I want to get rid of that edge one, but I want to keep the full size of that one, and I want to keep the bottom. Okay, so now I'm cropping a little bit off the top and both sides, and I'm going to keep that cropping. Okay, so just cleans up the edge, right? I could also do it with the erase tool if I wanted to keep the full composition. Okay? But cropping in a little bit on the top, got rid of this sort of dark area there as well, and I think that works. So let's see what it's applied. It's applied Accent AI and Sky Enhancer. If we take Sky Enhancer farther, let's see what it's doing. Not so much. It's actually darkening the forest, right? Because it's picking up blue, and it's it's thinking that the blue area is the sky, okay? Oh, I know another one that's going to work well, and that's dehaze. Okay, so dehaze, there's a slider for that in Lightroom as well. Basically, it does the same thing as what I did with the blacks and the white sliders. It basically just adds more black, right? And by adding the black, again, you'll notice that the color saturation increases when I do that. Okay? So I'm going to do a little bit of that. And let's see what happens when I go to color, and let's see what's been applied here. So it looks like some shifts of hues have been done. It looks like we've got less saturation on green, but I'm going to lower the saturation on the orange a tiny bit because I find it's getting a little too oversaturated up top here, and the red a tiny bit, and I'm going to let the blue be where it is. Let's see what happens if we try that remove color cast slider. It actually sort of warms things up a little bit, so less blue, that's not so bad. Let's see what this whole tool is doing. Let's go about like that. And I like the blue saturation, let's keep that. So it's shifted the blue more this way, right? Or we can shift it this way. I like the shift that it's done, so we'll stay with that. Awesome. Okay, so really quickly, we've just increased the contrast in the sort of hazy areas, right? We can also increase the haze using the Atmosphere AI tool, right? So it's going to give us sort of more of this layered fog or layered mist. Let's see what it does. Okay, so it picks up even more. So if I want to add more haze, in this case, it's not really adding anything, so I'm going to leave that one. I wouldn't do a whole lot to this image, to be honest. And if Mike is watching, the only other thing I might add is, again, a vignette. So darken the edges a little bit. And I think that's actually pretty good, right? If I want to add a little bit more of a silhouette effect, let's check our curves. Okay, so it has darkened, right? So look at that. I'm going to take the black slider down a bit more. Oh, it's lightened the black, so I'm going to go farther down with the blacks. So I do want to make this more of a silhouette. There we go. Okay, so now you can see that I'm clipping a little bit in this area here with the blue highlights there, or low lights rather. And by increasing the blacks, you see what that does is it really punches up that color. Ooh, if we go all the way, look what happens. Okay, so try things. Look what happens when I make a mistake and I went black minus 100. It actually works. Excuse me. I'm just going to grab a cough drop here. Okay. Very nice. Excuse me. We could see if the LUT works well on this one. I think the original colors are spectacular. But this is just really giving us ideas. That's nice too. So it reminds me of like Gorillas in the Mist, or like a spooky, something spooky. You know, I expect Sasquatch to jump out of this picture any moment. Right? Great image by Mike. Love it. Okay, so I'm going to undo the composition here. And I'm going to try erasing instead on this guy. And let's see how it does. So you just paint over the thing you want to erase. Make sure you have a little bit outside of it as well. And if you're doing erase, do it little by little, or if there's dots, different dots, do a couple at a time. Because that way, if it doesn't do what you want, you can just undo and you don't have to erase a whole bunch. Okay, there we go. Look at that. Did a nice job. I'm going to turn this histogram off, and that's just under the view menu. Okay. I want to see the full image. Let's have a look at the full image. There we go. So let's get the before and after, before, after. Okay. And I do, in hindsight, like this dark area at the corner, and it's a little bit bright at the top, so we could go back and add a vignette or darken the vignette. Or something else that I can do is go to this local masking tool, and then I can add basic and apply it with minus highlights and minus exposure for darken. Okay. Ooh, look what that does. Okay. Keep the saturation down, remember. But then I want it to just have this gradient mask, so it only is applying on the top area. Okay. Again, I've done it backwards. There we go. Nope, I did it the right way this time. Okay, so I want to keep the saturation. I need to fade it a lot more. Okay, so see how when I had the lines close together, you could actually see the effect, right? So you can see it when the lines are close together, you get this line on your picture, right? So you want to fade it more gradually in, just from the top, like that. Okay. Keep it soft. There we go. Got some really great images coming in. I'd love to see more people images, more street photography. So where's my street photographers? Send me some of those. Ideally, you want to send an image that you like, and I'm looking for images that I can enhance like this, that are already good images to start with. If you want to submit an image that you need fixed in some way, please indicate when you fill out the form what specifically it is you're looking to do. If it is removal of something or something more complicated, I can certainly attempt that in Photoshop, but I need to know what it is that you would like to have done if you're looking to fix an image. There we go. So now I'm super happy with this image. I think it looks fantastic. I'm just going to dial the saturation down just a little bit. And I might apply what's called a matte filter here, because I think this is going to be really nice on this image to add. So it sort of gives you, like, look at this. Okay, so it's like your blacks are not pure black. It just kind of gives this, again, more, adds to that hazy feeling. Okay, see what it's doing? That is a fantastic image. So kudos to Mike. And now that we've done the editing, you can see that it's got layers and layers, right? There's this layer in the foreground, there's the layer of the trees, and then there's another layer of trees, and then it feels like this haze keeps going back and back and back and back, right? And it makes me want to know what's in there, or maybe not, maybe it's too scary, right? But when you are shooting, aim to get these kinds of layers in your image and this type of look, because the depth in this image draws me in. This is an image I would hang on my wall. So well done, Mike. How are we doing here? Let me just see where everybody's at. Any questions? Audio and video is out of sync again. Yeah, I thought we did that. Thought we fixed that. Yes, that's a beautiful image, isn't it, Nancy? I love that image. So very, very nice. The last one I'm going to work on today is from Evo. And I've got this one in Lightroom. And what I want to do with this one, okay, so it's not, again, something different. What I see here is the subject is this little branch, and there's a lot of busy stuff all the way around, okay? So the first thing I want to do is crop it, and I'm going to crop freeform because I want to get rid of this branch at the top. I want to get rid of all this busyness and that branch over there. Let's see. And I want it to have sort of, I love this bokeh in the background, right? Maybe I'll leave a little bit more on the top. So I want to use this branch as this nice leading line into the picture. And I might even sort of tilt it a little bit more. And look what that does. It allows me to actually get more branch without getting this top branch, right? So I'm trying to create it so that I'm doing as little cloning as possible. So look at how much I'm cropping out. You want to be conscious of this when you're shooting, because you don't want to crop out so much of your image. Because if we go and look at the original here, let me go back over here. Okay, so this was shot with a Nikon D70. The original image is 6,000, basically 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. And now that I've cropped it, it's only 3,600 by 2,758. Okay, so you're literally cutting off pixels and losing a lot of the image, right? Maybe I'll do it not quite so much. There we go. But I really want to focus in. This is your image here, right? I want to have a nice leading line with that branch. About like that. Okay, now the problem that I'm left with is there's some bits of stuff up at the top that's not so great. And I could try and do that with the cloning tool in Lightroom. Lightroom's cloning tool is not the greatest, to be honest, right? I could paint over this thing and it chooses a spot that it's going to source from. And I usually find that I have to move that around. Okay, that looks pretty good. And let's see if I can do this entire blob. Let's see if it's going to do a decent job here. Okay, so see how it's left a little bit of color and it's not matching so great. Let's see if I can get it any better. Okay, that's not bad. So it did an okay job, right? Just getting rid of those and they're out of focus like that. Now I like the bokeh. We're going to do the trick with the shift, double click on the whites and the blacks again. Now look at really quickly how much contrast that's added, right? The problem is it's a lot of contrast in the background, which I don't want so much. Okay, so I'm going to scale it back just a tiny bit. And I'm going to keep the background softer and just add that punch in where I want the subject, okay? So I'm going to add a vignette, and I've just done that with a preset using the crop vignette tool, right? Darken the edges a little bit. And I'm going to use a radial filter because I want to focus in on these two guys here, right? So I want to use a radial filter. And I'm going to darken again on the outside. Okay. Not that much. And when I darken, I don't want to darken the highlights because then I lose all of that sort of nice bokeh in the background. I want to keep my highlights. But I'm lowering the darkness so really the subject stands out. And in doing so, you can see that the bokeh actually even stands out more as well. I'm going to duplicate the radial filter. Remember, move it over a little bit. And this time I'm going to make it smaller. And invert it. Because what I want to do is increase that texture. Right? So I want to increase the texture on these guys. Right? Now there's a cool feature of any of the adjustment tools in Lightroom, which is a range mask. Okay, so if you scroll down to the bottom of the tool, you'll see this thing called range mask. Okay, I can mask how this filter applies by color or by luminance. Okay, so if I go by luminance, that might work because I want it to apply to these beige things. Right? But if I take it off the dark areas, right, it's kind of working, but not so much. So let me try color instead. Right? So I'm going to just click on the eyedropper and then click on these guys here. Okay? So you see what's happening is that it's applied. Let me just shift it to red. Okay, so it's applied this tool only to the thing that I clicked on the color. Right? So in this case, it's applying it only to, see that when I turn it on, the red, these little hanging guys, okay? Which is exactly what I want. All right, so I've applied texture and I could apply clarity as well. So now they are really standing out and I'm gonna warm them up a little bit too, make them a little more golden. Perfect. All right. I think I'm going to go back and crop this one even a little bit more because there's too much of this sort of building at the top here. That's better. Right, so when you're shooting stuff like this, really watch the background because the original has sort of a house in the background. It looks like they're shooting up at this little guy in the tree here. Really watch things that are on the edge of your frame. Okay, so a lot of this cropping could have been done in camera, right? This is done with a 50mm lens on, so 50mm 1.8. Okay, so you would need to either physically get closer because it's a prime lens or use a zoom lens to crop in camera, okay? So the biggest thing that I'm doing here is cropping it and doing some tone control again, right? Let's pull it over to Luminar. So I'm going to do edit in Luminar AI. And again, I'm just going to use a JPEG for speedier processing when I'm going live. Let's see if there are any questions while this is opening. Okay. Oh, Anne is there. Hey, Anne. Were you here earlier? I did your image and you were not here. So let me show you what I did. I did your street scene image. And I'll show you what I did. So that was your original. And there is the changed one. So I punched up the contrast and added a sun rays. So you'll have to go back and watch how I did that, and so you can see how to make that image look like that. All right, where is my Luminar? There we go. Oh, no, that's not the edited version. So the problem with it is, again, I've got too many resources and my computer is just running slowly. Oh, not showing my screen. Sorry. Oops. Barbacoa. Okay, I'll go back here. So Anne says it was Barbacoa. So that's what I did with your image, Anne. There's the before and the after. Well, after and before. So that's what I did. I punched up the contrast, added the sun rays. So you'll have to go back and watch the replay to see how I did that. Barbacoa. That was one of my guesses. I figured it was either Barbacoa or Santiago. Okay, so this is now the close-up image that we had. And once again, you'll notice that Luminar suggests templates. So I know that I want to do something different with this one. And, ooh, that's kind of nice. So it's adding actually a grain, but it's kind of softened the colors. All right, so I like what that one is doing. I'm just going to go with that one. And I think what I want to do here is I do want to do a lot more vignetting. And I'm going to darken it quite dark. And then position it more over here, like so. The only thing I wish I could rotate it. I wish that was available. Maybe something I will suggest to Luminar. Okay, so we're going to go quite a bit darker. And I'm definitely looking for a lot on this one. Okay, now you see that it's already applied one, but I want to see if there's one that I like better. Okay, and I'm not even sure what I'm looking for here. I know that I just want something that's sort of funky and goes with the image. So before I had something in mind of what I was looking for. This time I'm really just playing around. Okay, I could go with something more muted. Actually, that one's kind of nice as well. Actually, that one's nice too. Okay, so this one is actually turning the image into a sepia tone. If we go to 100, let's keep it a little bit lower because it adds this sort of nice warmth to it. And the last thing I think I'm going to do here is I might even add a texture overlay. Now, I did this last week to an image of a rose that somebody had sent in, and I have to go, oh, good. Yay, I found my textures. So share, please, the Cuba texture pack. So I'm just going to pick a textured image. So I'm looking to add a little more grunge, maybe something like that. Actually, that might work well because it's got dripping things from the top, just like the these little guys are hanging from the top, so that might kind of look nice. So when it comes in, it's at 50% opacity, blend mode normal, and that's where I start playing. So you can increase opacity or decrease opacity just to see how much of the texture shows through, okay? Because the texture is on top, so if it's 100% opacity, the bottom image doesn't show. But I want to play with these blend modes and just scroll through them and see what they're doing. I find that often overlay or soft light work really well, or screen or lighten, right? So in this case, lighten's kind of cool. Let's go see how that's adding a lot of contrast, okay? We can increase the contrast of the texture itself or the saturation. Now keep in mind that it's only changing the saturation of the actual texture, not the image underneath. Okay, so if I don't like that texture, I can just go find another one, or I can invert it. I want something a little more crackly, less drips, more crackly. Okay, I'll use this one because it's got a lot of color. Okay, so you're going to see the color show up if I leave the saturation. So you can see the blue and the pink showing through, right? So I turn that down because I want the texture without the color, okay? All the way down. Play around with the positioning of the image or the texture. Okay, I like what it's doing there. And overlay works really well in this case. Let's go soft light. All right. Just like that. So it's adding a little bit of texture and interest into the image. So this is a great macro sort of image again. Playing around with the look and adding a texture overlay, which is something you cannot do in Lightroom, right? So if you wanted to add a texture overlay and you don't have Luminar, you would have to use Photoshop and add a layer. All right. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of our session today. And I would just like to thank everybody for joining in once again. Please remember to keep sending your images. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. And we will see you next time. So keep practicing. Keep sending me your images. Tell me in the comments below or in the chat, please, what have you learned today by watching this video? If there is one tip that you picked up, I would love to hear from you in the chat. Tell me, what was the thing that you saw me do today that just blew your mind, right? Was it the sharpening of the rhinos? Was it the tractor in the field? Was it the macro? Was it Anne's image with the sun rays, or was it the one with the people, right? Tell me what you saw me do that you can then go use and apply to your images. Take care, everybody. And until next time, we'll see you soon.